suspended provisions of the Open Meetings Law on an emergency basis, we are conducting today's session remotely. I would like to remind those who are participating by phone to please mute their lines except when they are speaking. The public will have an opportunity to listen to the session on the department's webcast page and will also be recorded and transcribe the session as has been our practice. These arrangements have been reviewed by our general counsel and been found that these meet the requirements of the executive order. Due to the absence of one of our four sitting commissioners, the PSC will not have a quorum and therefore cannot vote on any items. Since the three recently appointed commissioners are still being onboarded, including the necessary steps such as signing their oath of office, the practical reality that there was insufficient time for them to be fully briefed for this June session. They are not in the position to vote, and the new commissioners will be in place for our July session. Before moving to the agenda, I would like to conduct a roll call of the commissioners. Commissioner James Alenci is excused. When I call your name, please confirm that you're with us. Commissioner Diane Berman.
Here, thank you.
Commissioner Tracy Edwards.
I am here. Good morning.
Thank you very much. Our first item of discussion, and for an informational non-voting item, is item 101, case 21G-0165, which is the 2020 Pipeline Safety Performance Measures Report presented by Michael Panzanella, Utility Engineering Specialist 2, and Joseph Dowling, Assistant Counsel, is available for questions. Michael, will you please begin?
Thank you. Good morning, Chair, Commissioners. My name is Michael Panzanella, a Utility Engineering Specialist 2 with the Office of Electric, Gas, and Water, Pipeline Safety and Reliability Section. Item 101 is the 2020 Pipeline Safety Performance Measures Report and is for information only. The measures that make up the report are the result of collaborative efforts beginning in the 1990s between the 11 major gas distribution operators and the Department of Public Service. The report examined the results of operator performance in specific areas that include damage prevention, emergency response, and leak management for 2020. Also examined were the results of staff audits and investigations that verify compliance with the pipeline safety regulations for 2019. Overall, the data indicates that performance has substantially improved for operators across the state over the 18-year period staff has been reporting performance to the Commission. More notably, operator performance either improved or remained consistent throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. It is important to note that the operators maintained focus on these performance measures, which ensured the same, if not a greater level of public safety. Next slide, please. The first measure, damage prevention, gauges the success of operators in minimizing damage to buried gas facilities caused by excavation activities. The damage prevention measure is broken down into 4 categories: damages due to mismarks, or the inaccurate marking by the operator of its affected underground facility, operator and their contractor damages, third-party excavator error, and no calls or failure of an excavator to provide notice of intent to excavate to the one-call notification system. Compared with that of 2019, there was a 9.1% decrease in the total number of one-call tickets, or approximately 76,000. And there was an 8.5% decrease in the total number of damages, or 132. The total damage prevention rate remained consistent at approximately 1.85 damages per 1,000 one-call tickets. Specifically, the mismark rate improved 12.3% in 2020, the no-call rate improved 6.8%, the operator and their contractor rate remained consistent, and the third-party rate declined 10.1%. However, this decline in performance was primarily the result of the number of damages being normalized by less one-call tickets. In 2019, there were 742 excavator error damages, and in 2020, there were 743. Next slide, please. The second measure, emergency response, reflects the operator's ability to respond promptly to reports of leak, odor, and emergency notifications by examining the percentage of reports that were responded to within specified intervals. The intervals are response to 75% of leak odor and emergency reports within 30 minutes, response to 90% within 45 minutes, and response to 95% within 60 minutes. Operator performance for each of the emergency response time intervals improved in 2020. In general, the operators have continued to use technologies such as GPS to quickly identify the most appropriate employee to respond, and have continued placing or added personnel in certain geographical areas during the times of the day that have historically high volumes of emergency notifications. In addition, the Commission has incorporated positive revenue adjustments within the operators' respective rate plans to encourage further improvements. Next slide, please. The third measure, leak management, examines operators' performance related to their leak inventories in addition to the evaluation of leaks discovered and leaks repaired. Potentially hazardous leaks include any leak that requires repair or types 1, 2A, and 2. Type 3 leaks, which do not have a prescribed repair time frame, are considered to be non-hazardous. Type 3 leaks require reevaluation during the next required leakage survey or annually, whichever is sooner, to ensure that a public safety concern has not developed. While Type 3 leaks are not expected to become a safety concern, operators eliminate these types of leaks because it reduces lost gas, maintenance costs, the total number of emergency reports, methane leakage as a contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, and any dampening effect the persistent odor has on negatively impacting public awareness efforts. For leaks requiring repair, the end of the calendar year generally coincides with the beginning of the frost season. During this time frame, there is a greater chance of gas migration into a building because the gas cannot vent as readily through the soil to the atmosphere due to a blanket of frost. In general, all operators have demonstrated improvement over the past several years. The total year-end backlog improved 14.1% in 2020, or by approximately 1,600 leaks. The repairable year-end backlog declined by 13 leaks. The total number of leaks discovered improved 23.9%, or by approximately 4,400 leaks, and the total number of leaks repaired improved 26.6%, or by approximately 6,000 leaks. Next slide, please. For the fourth and final measure, operators are evaluated on their compliance with the minimum pipeline safety regulations. This measure looks at non-compliance issues as identified by staff during annual audit activity. Each year, staff conducts statistically based audits and investigations of the operators to determine their compliance. Each non-compliance identified represents an area where this operator failed to meet the minimum requirements as prescribed. The data reported varies greatly from year to year, which is due in part to staff's 5-year audit cycle. Staff's audits and investigations occur on varying frequencies determined by the risk each regulation poses to public safety. The regulations are identified either as high risk, in which audits are conducted annually, or as other risks, which are evaluated on a 2, 3, 4, or 5-year frequency not to exceed 5 years. In 2019, staff identified non-compliances in all 11 of the major operator service territories. However, improvements have been realized in each of the previous 5 calendar years. This is due in part to the negative revenue adjustments which have been incorporated into most of the operators' respective rate plans. Regardless of the efforts made thus far, the goal for each operator should remain the complete elimination of all non-compliances with the minimum pipeline safety regulations. Next slide, please. As operators continue their outreach and education efforts, adopt better practices in responding to leak, odor, and emergency reports, and work to replace leak-prone infrastructure, staff expects further performance improvements will occur. Thank you, Chair, Commissioners. This concludes my presentation of the 2020 Pipeline Safety Performance Measures Report. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. This report is continued good news as we continue to improve the safety of our gas system. However, I think it is very vital as we decarbonize our system over the next decades that we ensure that pipeline safety and gas system safety writ large is a top priority of this commission, and our vigilance will be necessary as long as there is gas in the system. Commissioner Berman, do you have any questions or comments?
Thank you so much. First, I just want to take a safety moment and remind folks that if you smell gas, to please leave the area immediately. Once you're safe, call 911 or your utility to report a possible leak. Do not light matches, start your car, or use any electronic appliances that could spark and start a fire. We'll be making a few comments here, more than in the other sections. Pipeline safety is very important to me personally. The integrity and reliability of our gas system is paramount, and at the core of that is safety. So it's really important for us to hear how well the utilities have been meeting their obligations. Also, we must place a strong emphasis on innovative technologies to enhance pipeline safety, and that includes innovations around damage prevention, leak detection, methane detectors, and other infrastructure upgrades and improvements. This presentation does show us the trends in a positive way for the amount of work that's been done to ensure that we are enhancing pipeline safety and allowing for a smarter, safer, and more efficient natural gas system. And the presentation that was done on the past performance with respect to safety is really important to show that we are succeeding in proper utility regulatory oversight with a focus on continuous improvement. So I appreciate it and thank you for the presentation. Our decarbonization policies do need to understand the fact that gas is a core critical supply chain fuel source for reliability, resiliency, and safety. I do want to thank all stakeholders who are engaged in these critical matters, but I especially want to thank our staff, the utilities, the Common Ground Alliance, especially for the Common Ground Alliance's informative and forward-thinking technology report of 2021. And I want to say a special thank you to our federal partners, especially PHMSA, who continues to be an amazing partner in helping us all work collaboratively towards continuous improvement in the natural gas system. We will continue to work with PHMSA, especially as we help the industry responsibly and reasonably implement and address the mandates from the Pipes Act of 2020. Lastly, New York has a good story to tell in our regulatory focus on pipeline safety and resiliency. I want to list out 9 specific things I see as very critical to why we continue in New York to be successful, especially in substantial reductions in leak backlogs. First, we are focused on repairable leak backlogs. Initially, we started to highlight repairable leak backlogs, particularly those associated with leaks that our regulations required to be repaired. These are type 1, 2A, and 2. In other words, all but type 3. And we do this in the annual gas safety performance measures that were reported today and are reported every June at to the Commission. This essentially highlighted the number of repairable leaks each utility had at the end of the year. However, and importantly, this has morphed into, and I think a very sound morphing into, also reporting total leak backlogs, which include all leaks, including type 3. At the same time, we instituted performance metrics for each company that instituted a regulatory liability, NRA, for each LDC if they did not meet thresholds for total leak and repairable leak backlogs. These thresholds focus on continuous improvement. 2, we instituted performance metrics that include positive rate adjustments in addition to the NRAs. This allows companies to earn a positive rate adjustment for superior performance. This has had more to do with the diminishing state leak backlog than anything, with the exception of leak-prone pipe replacement. 3, we instituted performance metrics through the incentives to address and eliminate the highest volume emitters from the leak inventory. Typically, LDCs were able to earn an incentive for fixing the highest 25 to 50 emitting leaks per year, even if they were only a type 3 leak. 4, Our leak survey and investigation regulations in New York require each survey to be conducted with an approved device. This ensures that the technology used for leak surveys and investigations meets expectations and increases the likelihood that an existing leak will be discovered. 5, we had an aggressive leak-prone pipe replacement program where we expected companies to replace all leak-prone pipe within 20 years. We started this in 2014, 2015. Under this, we have gone from a 50-plus year replacement strategy to an under 20 year. 6, new technology. We have been, as a commission, receptive to new technology, and the approval process is pretty straightforward. Our expectation has been that new technology must perform at least as well as the flame ionization devices. If it finds the same leaks or more in a double-blind study, it has been likely to receive approval. 7, we have supported wide-scale rollout of residential methane detectors to the point that I can safely say we in New York are the nation's leaders with this deployment. In addition, we have worked with Con Edison to support their development and deployment, at first through a pilot program and then system-wide, of AMI-enabled residential methane detectors that instantly alert gas control of the presence of methane so that service personnel and 911 can be deployed. Con Edison is on schedule to have an AMI-enabled detector in every building in their gas service territory within the next 3 to 5 years. This goes hand in hand with 8. We have supported increased leakage surveys throughout New York. In New York City, Con Edison conducts a monthly driving leakage survey in addition to the mandated annual survey. These driving surveys are intended to monitor the cast iron network for cracks and leaks. Upstate, we've had companies transition to annual leakage surveys as opposed to 3-year and 5-year surveys. Initially, there was a spike in leaks found from doing these surveys annually, but over time, the leaks found have fallen dramatically. And 9, encouraging ways to incorporate API recommended practices 1173 and pipeline safety management system practices is a sound one and one that we should be leaning into more. Appreciate very much the opportunity to lay out these core critical issues. Appreciate listening to the presentation and the critical importance of that. And I thank you so much.
Thank you, Commissioner Berman, for those insightful comments. Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, thank you very much. There's 2 items that I'm not comfortable with. One is on damage prevention, no calls. I think some companies use this just as a matter of business, where they are not calling and following the safety instructions. I think we should have 0 tolerance for no calls. It doesn't look like that we have made lots of progress over the course of the last couple of years. So I'd like to see if we could do a deeper dive to see what we can do to improve that. Secondly, on the compliance with safety regulations, on the high risk, we have not made a significant amount of progress since 2017. I just like to have more information on that and the staff's recommendation on what we can do to improve that, because that is critical. The non-compliance per operator headquarters, it started out in 2013 is very high. I know that the staff has been working hard to with the companies to improve that, but it looks like we have stalled since 2017. So I think we need to do a little bit more on a deeper dive on that to see what we can do to ensure that we can improve that as well. But I'm grateful for the metrics. It looks like National Grid Long Island and National Grid New York is making some progress, but they still have, because of their size, a lot of leakage. So I think we need to pay attention to that. And I want to thank the staff for their report. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. Now we'll go to our second item for discussion. Again, an informational non-voting item. The item 201, case 21M0046, which is the 2020 Utility Customer Service Performance Report presented by Kayla Whitaker, Utility Analyst, and Joseph Dowling is available for questions. Kayla, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Howard. Good morning, Commissioners. Item 201 summarizes the 2020 customer service performance for several of New York State's electric, natural gas, and water utilities. Next slide, please. There are two measures used to monitor utility performance: performance indicators, or CSPIs, and performance mechanisms, or CSPMs. Per the Commission's order in case 15M0566, staff has been striving to align the utilities' CSPMs to reflect the CSPIs so that all utilities' performances may be compared equally. CSPMs help to align shareholder and ratepayer interests by providing potential earnings consequences to shareholders that reflect the quality of service provided to utility customers. Next slide, please. The utilities file annual customer service reports for the CSPMs, which allows staff to track customer service performance each year and identify trends that are to be addressed in rate case proceedings. As you can see in the chart, CSPMs have typically been tracked by the following areas: PSC complaint rate, survey-based measures of customer satisfaction, call answer rate, which is the percentage of calls answered by a representative within 30 seconds, the percent of adjusted bills due to company error, the percent of bills issued based on estimated meter readings, and terminations and uncollectible expenses. Staff has conducted a robust audit into the utilities' reported customer service performance, processes, and procedures. This included multiple interrogatory responses, a review of procedures, several conference calls with utilities, and verification of the granular data provided in the utilities report. Following this audit process, staff found several areas where the companies should improve upon their reporting and standardization of procedures. In the report, staff makes multiple recommendations for the companies to improve upon their customer service operations in regard to customer service appointments, satisfaction surveys, telephone answer response, deferred payment agreements, and for the 2020 termination and uncollectible positive revenue adjustments, which were earned due to the COVID-19 pandemic terminations and terminations moratorium. Next slide, please. Following this audit, staff concludes that the majority of New York's electric, natural gas, and water utilities met or exceeded their customer service performance standards per their individual customer service mechanisms for 2020. Two utilities failed to meet their designated targets on their percent of estimated meter reads metric: New York State Electric and Gas, and Rochester Gas and Electric, or NYSEG and RG&E. Last year, NYSEG failed to meet its percent of estimated meter reads target with a performance of 10%, which is 3.9% greater than the minimum target of 6.1%. RG&E failed to meet the target for the same metric in 2020 with a performance of 11.5% against a minimum target of 6%, 5.5% greater than the minimum target. And as a result of their failure to meet these targets, which were agreed upon in their joint proposals and approved by the Commission in cases 15E0283 et al., NYSEG qualifies to be assessed a negative revenue adjustment of $1.4 million, while RG&E qualifies to be assessed a negative revenue adjustment of $900,000. However, this negative revenue adjustment is to be further adjusted. A provision in the company's joint proposal required that should either company fail to meet a metric target for 2 or more consecutive years, the following year's negative revenue adjustment would double. And because RG&E failed to meet its target for the percent of estimated meter reads in 2019, RG&E's negative revenue adjustment would double from $900,000 to $1.8 million. RG&E and NYSEG cited that the COVID-19 pandemic was the primary cause for their failure to meet their estimated meter reads targets. The companies attributed the relative decline in this metric performance as being due to the statewide pandemic-related restrictions that were enacted to minimize interactions between utility employees and the public. which in this case impacted NYSEG and Argini's ability to read utility meters beginning in March 2020. On this point, it should be noted that NYSEG and Argini have filed a petition with the Commission to waive their 2020 results for the percent of estimated meter reads as part of their cases 15E0283, which is being reviewed within these proceedings. Next slide, please. The terminations and uncollectible incentive mechanism typically consists of 2 or 3 measures: residential terminations, uncollectible expenses, and arrearages. The terminations component measures the number of residential customer terminations or disconnections for non-payment. The uncollectible expenses or bad debt component measures the dollar amount of accounts that have been terminated the company has not been able to recover from customers after a specific time frame. The arrearages component measures the dollar amount of money owed following customers' termination of service before they have paid their final bills or prior to the account being transferred into uncollectible status. Under this mechanism, several utilities reported that they had exceeded their established metric performance targets and earned a positive revenue adjustment in 2020 for reducing residential customer terminations and associated expenses that were written off. These utilities include Central Hudson, Corning, Kedley, Kedney, Niagara Mohawk, NYSEG, Argini, Orange and Rockland, and St. Lawrence. Because New York State instituted a moratorium on terminations and disconnections due to non-payment, utilities were prevented from terminating customers during the pandemic, and performances for this measure were consequently artificially improved. Staff applauds Kedley and Kedney, Niagara Mohawk, and St. Lawrence for filing a letter to the Secretary to the Commission stating that while their performances met the targets, they would not attempt to recover the PRAs from customers due to the moratorium. Central Hudson initially reported that it intended to recover the PRA from ratepayers and use the funds to offset the cost of the COVID-19 pandemic. The Commission's recent order in Corning's rate case proceedings as part of 20G0101 temporarily paused this mechanism until the company's next rate case filing, as it was decided that the moratorium did and will continue to affect its performance. Orange and Rockland's joint proposal has no provision regarding the exclusion of a positive revenue adjustment for performance affected by outside influences, such as the pandemic, and therefore the company stated it would move forward with recovering the PRA. Customers benefit from utility reductions and termination uncollectibles, as the utilities further assist customers by avoiding service shutoffs through additional bill payment methods or payment agreements, as well as reduced uncollectible expenses, which is ultimately paid for by customers. However, staff emphasizes utility performances were not a result of steps the companies took to reduce termination and uncollectible expenses. Rather, the utility simply followed public service laws and other directives due to the pandemic. Pursuant to utility rate plans, these positive and negative revenue adjustments, with the exception of Orange and Rockland, are automatically deferred under each utility's respective rate plans and to be handled in future rate cases and accrue interest. Staff will address the termination of uncollectible positive revenue adjustment in Orange and Rockland's ongoing rate case, and therefore no commission action is required at this time. In summary, the customer service performance mechanisms currently in place at the utilities in New York State establish strong standards for performance and put significant amounts of shareholder earnings at risk for non-satisfactory performance. While the COVID-19 pandemic affected how utilities conducted business, they were, for the most part, able to meet their targets and assist customers where needed. Overall, these mechanisms implemented by the Commission, coupled with staff's ongoing monitoring and auditing efforts, appears to have been effective in encouraging the companies to prioritize customer service and to ensure that the quality of customer service remains at high levels in New York. Staff will continue to monitor utility customer service quality to ensure the fair and appropriate treatment of utility customers across the state and to promote performance-based rate-making strategies to improve customer service. This completes my presentation on the Customer Service Performance Report for 2020, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Kayla. First, can you remind the Commission how long the current moratorium on terminations is in New York State?
I believe that following the end of the state of emergency, it is 180 days following that, or at the close of December 31st, it is 180 days following that. Joe
Okay,
Dowling, please
thank
correct
you.
me if I'm wrong.
I believe that's correct.
Well, thank you. That just reminds us what an unprecedented year plus that we have lived through, and that many, many thousands of struggling customers have had a very, very difficult time making their payments, not only on the utility bills, rent, and a variety of other must-pay bills. Again, I think as we move forward, how we deal with the imbalances of uncollectibles at the end of the day will be a major determination by this commission. With that being said, you know, the failure to meet the targets, particularly that we noticed in RG&E and NYSEG, on billing and meter reading, you know, it points to the thing that the need that penalties to the company shareholders need to be sufficient to induce better performance. And I think we will need to remain vigilant in that regard. However, we note with interest in our last rate case that both companies will accelerate their advanced metering capitalization, which should go a long way in correcting the problem of no meter reads. With that, I turn it over to Commissioner Berman for a comment.
Thank you so much. I just have one question and then just short comments. So I guess the question I have is really looking at all this. I do know that we have an outage notification incentive mechanism report, the ONIM, that is really specific to Con Ed that came about after a neighborhood outage. I guess I'm asking, and I don't know if this is for Kayla or someone in OCS, really about the process and the analysis of that utility assessment of their performance and lessons that we may learn from that, and whether it's something that we need to look at more carefully, and whether or not it should be incorporated more globally for other utilities, potentially as some best practices. So I'm just curious on that one.
So Commissioner Berman, this is Eric Ryder. I would say in response to that while Con Ed does have that metric, there's an ongoing investigation on storm responses, so we're hesitant to say anything more in terms of their performance on that mechanism here. However, we can take that back and look to see if there are ways to measure utility performance in that area for the rest of the utilities in the state.
Great, thank you. That's important to me to look at that. As we all know, the provision of safe and adequate service is a basic obligation of the utilities, and ensuring adequate performance in these areas is a critical aspect of our utility regulation. Utilities are generally compensated in rate cases to provide safe and adequate service to customers. And as part of our oversight, we work through and with the Department of Public Service staff to monitor how well the utilities meet and exceed that obligation. These presentations, I understand, are for information only, but to the extent that it helps give us guidance on the appropriate metrics, especially for our future decision-making, not only in rate cases, but as we see in the pending NYSEG RG&E pending petition, and also in the perhaps COVID generic proceeding, especially as it relates to the PRAs and NRAs. That is really important. So I thank you for this. I look forward to engaging and drilling down a little bit more. Thanks.
Commissioner Edwards.
Yes, thank you. I just have a question. On page, I'm not sure what page number it is. It's the positive revenue adjustments. These 9 companies, it states that they are entitled to collect this money from the ratepayers. Is that correct? And of these 9, 6 of them have opted not to or weren't entitled. Is that correct?
So Commissioner Edwards, this is Eric Ryder. Of the utilities you see on this slide, Kedley, Kedney, Niagara Mohawk all filed a letter saying that while their performance did exceed the targets and mathematically they would accrue a PRA to be collected, they are going to go forego that. St. Lawrence also filed a letter that said that they would forego the PRA. NYSEG and Argini have a pending petition that addresses both the NRAs that they have missed plus their PRAs, which leaves Central Hudson. They had responded that they would collect it, but they would be looking to for ways to help customers in the COVID pandemic. Corning's metric has been paused, and O&R claims that they have earned it, and staff is addressing that in their current rate proceeding.
Okay. Well, they can help the customers by not collecting it. And if all of the rest of these companies, especially the ones with the highest amount, if there is a understanding that there is a need out there and people are suffering still, although the pandemic is, hopefully coming to a close, people have not yet recovered. So I just find it outrageous that these 3 companies do not recognize that. And I'd like to make sure that I'm on the record saying that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Edwards. Now we'll go to our third item, another item for information and non-voting item, item 301, case 21E-0177, which is the 2020 Electric Safety Standards and Performance Report presented by Jason Paws, Utility Supervisor, and Stephen Kramer, Assistant Counsel, who will be available for questions. Jason, will you please begin?
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Today I'll be providing an overview of the electric safety standards and the utilities compliance for 2020. This is for information only. Next slide, please. I will start with some background information on the electric safety standards. The original safety standards were adopted by the Commission in January 2005. The standards include straight voltage testing and visual inspection of all electric facilities on an annual basis, and the adoption of the National Electric Safety Code as the minimum standard for utility construction, maintenance, and operation. The overall goal of the safety standards is to safeguard the public from exposure to stray voltage and to identify and mitigate any potentially harmful condition before safety hazards and or reliability deficiencies develop. 2020 marked the 16th year for the electric safety standards, or the first year of the 4th 5-year cycle. Next slide, please. The utilities are required to test their underground system and streetlight facilities on an annual basis, while manually testing their overhead distribution and transmission facilities on a 5-year cycle. With regards to testing, inspectors carry a pen-like device that lights up red when voltage is detected. 4.5 volt is a calibrated threshold of device, as that is the voltage limit where the potential for injury becomes concerning. However, the device does signal for lower voltages. Once voltage is detected, the facility is then tested with a digital voltmeter to record the actual readings. All voltages of 1 volt or more are required to be recorded and mitigated. In total, there were 291 voltage findings for manual straight voltage testing of 1 volt or more, or approximately 0.03% of the roughly 1 million facilities tested in 2020. This graph shows the historical findings for manual stray voltage testing going back 2 years. The reddish-brown sections show the findings between 1 and 4.4 volts, and the green sections show the findings that are 4.5 volts or greater. The 2020 total number of stray voltage findings stayed roughly the same at the 4.5 volts and greater level. However, the 1 to 4.4 volt level saw a significant decrease, mainly attributed to a reduction in findings on streetlights in Con Edison. Streetlights continue to be the largest facility grouping with stray voltage findings. For example, in 2020, out of the total 291 findings, streetlights accounted for 50 of those findings. As part of the electric safety standards, the utilities are required to test all publicly accessible streetlights, regardless of ownership. If an issue is found with a streetlight that the utility does not own, that utility is required to make the condition safe, it is ultimately the responsibility of the municipality that owns a streetlight to make that the necessary repairs needed. Next slide, please. For mobile stray voltage testing, per commission order, 12 mobile surveys are required in New York City, 2 in Buffalo, and 1 each in Yonkers, White Plains, New Rochelle, Albany, Niagara Falls, and Rochester each year. The upstate locations were selected due to their population density, 50,000 or more. Again, any voltage findings of 1 volt or more is reported and mitigated. In 2020, there were 6,810 voltage findings in the 3 utility service territories where mobile stray voltage testing is required, which is down from the 8,608 findings in 2019. This graph represents the total number of stray voltage findings across the state using the mobile testing units for the last 2 years. Blue represents the Con Edison findings, orange represents National Grid, and the red represents RG&E findings. As you can see, Con Edison makes up the clear majority of mobile stray voltage findings, based largely on the number of scans completed and the size of its underground system. Next slide, please. Per the electric safety standards, the utilities are required to complete visual inspections on 20% of their facilities each year, so that 100% of utilities' transmission and distribution facilities will be inspected at least once every 5 years. 2020 was the first year of the fourth full cycle of the inspection program. All utilities have completed approximately 20% inspections of its assets in compliance with the safety standards. For inspections, 2020 saw the downward trend continue in overall deficiencies found by the electric utilities, with a total of approximately 81,000 deficiencies found. That is a 5% reduction compared to the approximately 85,000 found in 2019, and a 60% reduction from the approximately 190,000 deficiencies found back in 2016. For PSEG Long Island, they are not subject to the Commission's safety standards, as they and system owner LIPA are not regulated by the Commission. Through discussions with DPS staff, PSEG Long Island began a facility inspection and stray voltage testing pilot program in 2020. To attain a representative sample across their service territory, 2 townships in the Western Division and 2 townships in their Eastern Divisions were selected for the pilot program, which comprise approximately 10% of total assets. In total, PSEG Long Island tested and inspected approximately 35,000 facilities in 2020, and found a total of 9 stray voltage cases and 1,003 inspection deficiencies. Of the 1,003 deficiencies found through inspections, 5 were level 1, 299 were level 2, and 626 were level 3. The company will extend the stray voltage testing pilot program in 2021 to inspect an additional 10% of their facilities, targeting areas where they expect the highest rate of deficiencies. Next slide, please. In summary, the New York utilities have met and complied with the requirements of the Commission's electric safety standards for 2020. That completes my presentation. I'm now happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I have just two comments. First, echoing staff's comments regarding municipalities' responsibilities for safety of their equipment. We have seen literally hundreds of thousands of outdoor lighting fixtures and poles being transferred from utilities to municipalities, which will save them a great deal of money, and we look forward to increased energy efficiency. However, along with that transfer comes this added responsibility of safety of that equipment. It is something that I urge all municipalities to embrace fully as they engage in this transfer of assets to municipal ownership. The second item I'd like to say in terms of why this program is important and will need to continue well into the future is the increased use of poles for attachments for a variety of telecom and other functions, particularly the installation of 5G equipment on poles, which requires a variety of new demands on those poles, including electric service to each one of the 5G boxes, as well as the fiber hookup, which on all the poles, which also provides additional stress on the equipment. And again, I would expect and that this could possibly increase the issues of stray voltage and other safety issues as these installations are being completed. That's why the utmost safety and vigilance must be maintained by not only the utilities, but the third parties that will want to rent space on those poles, both from utility ownership and municipal ownership in this case, that safety has been maintained. I'm particularly troubled, again, that PSEG and LIPA do not have a universal standard and have not been part of this program now for a very long time, which, by the way, for those that don't remember, this case and this program began with some very serious incidences, particularly in New York City, which regarded in serious injury to pedestrians and their pets from some very serious stray voltage issues. And we cannot let that happen. And my hope is that PSEG and LIPA will adopt a universal program in the very near future. With that, Commissioner Berman, do you have any comments?
Thank you so much. So this informational item at its core is about electric safety, which goes to a foundational regulatory duty that we have. I really thank staff for the presentation, which laid out dedicated oversight and vigilance. There does seem to be good and steady progress, and we see the positive impact of how we, especially last year, incorporated in some fashion PSEG Long Island into this review. I also concur with the chair. While I do recognize that PSEG Long Island is not subject to the Commission safety standards, as PSEG Long Island and the system owner LIPA are not regulated by the Commission, I really do believe that we should continue to monitor that and help to increase such engagement to Long Island as well. And while I'm happy to see that we did increase it, we did start looking at this in 2020, and PSEG Long Island began the facility inspection and stray voltage testing pilot program, and they are committed to voluntarily extend the stray voltage pilot program in 2021 to inspect an additional 10% of facilities and targeting areas where the highest rate of deficiencies is expected. I don't think it's enough. I think that they should really look at the positive impacts from the other utilities and step up and increase it even more so. And so it's really important to me. I also do want to echo what was said by staff, and I think it's an important matter to note that 2020 was the first year of our 5-year cycle and the fourth fifth year cycle, and it's the fourth fifth year cycle. To me, it's really important, especially with new commissioners coming on. We have in the next few weeks more discussion in our agency on what we expect during our current fifth-year cycle and engagement on some of the lessons that were learned from the past 3 5-year cycles. I also do want to point out that we continue to have, while we see positive trends, we do continue to have stray voltage concerns in the street lighting arena. This is something that I've been focused on since I came on the commission. We've done a really good job of engagement on the street lighting issue with stray voltage, but as we are increasingly involved in street lighting enrollment, I think it's really important that we dig a little deeper on the data that we're looking at as it relates to stray voltage specific to street lighting, and ensure we're doing all we can to not only educate the public, but to the municipalities and others who may be undertaking street lighting infrastructure upgrades or new infrastructure completely, especially as it concerns the broadband rollout. Really think that we should be examining what we could do in an innovative way to do all we can in this area. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Edwards.
Thank you. I agree with Commissioner Berman on the street lighting. She gave those comments exactly as I would. So thank you very much, and no further comments.
Thank you. With that, we will go to our final item for today. Again, another informational non-voting item. It's item 302, case 21E-0113, which is the 2020 Electric Reliability Performance Report presented by Mary Ferrer, Utility Engineering Specialist, and John Favreau, Assistant Counsel, is available for questions. Mary, will you please begin?
Yes. Good morning, Chair Howard, Commissioners. Today, I will be providing you with a brief statewide summary of New York's electric reliability performance for 2020. Staff's written report provides additional information and individual reviews for each of the major electric utilities. Next slide, please. Each year, staff performs an analysis of electric reliability performance based on monthly interruption data submitted by the electric utilities. Staff uses this data to calculate the frequency and duration of interruptions and identify trends. Frequency is affected by factors such as system design, capital investment, maintenance practices, and weather. Decisions made by utilities today, however, can take several years before being fully reflected in the frequency measure. Duration is affected by workforce levels, workforce management, and geography. Policy changes can have a more immediate effect on duration. By reviewing the data both with and without major storms, we can achieve a balance between interruptions under the utility's control, such as equipment failures, and those where the utility may need to implement resiliency measures to prevent interruptions. It should be noted that the statistics presented today reflect two major events that occurred last year. The two most significant storms in 2020 were the tropical storm on August 4th and the October 7th derecho. Combined, these two storms were responsible for approximately 75% of customer hours of interruption in 2020. Reliability Performance Mechanisms, or RPMs, include company-wide targets for frequency and duration. RPM targets are established in each rate case, and electric utilities are subject to negative revenue adjustments for failing to meet RPM targets. All electric utilities except Con Ed and NYSEG met their RPM targets in 2020. Con Edison's frequency was higher than their target. As a result, Con Edison incurred a negative revenue adjustment of $5 million. The largest event that drove Con Edison's frequency performance was the Rainy transmission incident on August 7th in Manhattan. NYSEG also failed its RPM target for frequency in 2020, incurring a negative revenue adjustment of $7 million. trees continue to be the largest contributor to interruptions for NYSEG. In its last rate case, NYSEG's vegetation management budget was provided 2 new tree-related programs. The first program reclaims circuits that have not been trimmed in over 5 years, and the second proactively addresses danger trees outside of the distribution right-of-way. Next slide, please. This graph shows the frequency performance for the last 5 years statewide. Since Con Edison's networks are usually less prone to interruptions than overhead systems, and Con Edison serves the largest percentage of the state's electric customers, Con Edison's data can skew the overall statistics. As a result, we review the data with and without Con Edison. Excluding major storms, the statewide frequency for 2020 declined slightly when compared to both last year and the 5-year average, when viewed with and without Con Edison. On average, customers experienced 1 interruption every 17.5 months. For utilities other than Con Edison, customers on average experienced 1 interruption every 11.5 months. The major causes for interruptions, excluding major storms, were equipment failures and tree contacts. To reduce the frequency of interruptions, the utilities invest in capital projects, inspections, and maintenance activities. Next slide, please. This graph shows duration performance for the last 5 years on a statewide basis, excluding major storms, and again showing performance with and without Con Edison. The statewide duration was 1 hour and 59 minutes. This is about 3.5 minutes shorter than 2019 and 2.5 minutes longer than the statewide 5-year average. The statewide duration for utilities other than Con Edison was 1 hour and 53 minutes in 2020, which is 1 minute longer than 2019, and again, approximately 2.5 minutes longer than the statewide 5-year average. Next slide, please. There we go. Major storms in 2020 caused approximately 63% more customer interruptions and 400% more customer hours of interruption when compared to 2019. The state experienced 29 separate major storm events in 2020, resulting in the worst performance for frequency and duration over the past 5 years. As can be seen in the graph, the effect of major storms on customers in 2020 was more than those experienced in 2018, which had several notable winter and spring storms. The largest storm in 2020, Tropical Storm Isaias, significantly impacted Long Island, New York City, and the mid to lower Hudson Valley, resulting in 1.5 million customer interruptions statewide, with nearly 1 million of these in the Con Ed and PSEG service territories. Restoration efforts lasted through August 12th. The second largest storm occurred on October 7th, when the upstate utilities experienced severe wind. Approximately 340,000 customers were interrupted. National Grid service territory was the most severely affected, reporting 81% of interruptions. Most of these interruptions were in the National Grid Eastern Division. National Grid made steady progress restoring customers, with 90% restored late in the afternoon on October 9th. Next slide, please. Thank you. This concludes my presentation. We will be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I have one question. I guess it's the first is regard to your last slide dealing with weather. Clearly, the weather patterns have changed significantly, including major incidences that have a degree of unpredictability. So I would ask, particularly in regard to maybe this is a question for Kevin Wisely. can you describe sort of like what, in terms of how particularly the upstate straight line wind events were different than our tropical storm events, particularly regarding to ESAAS?
Hello, Commissioner, and thank you. This is Kevin Wisely, Director, Office of Resilience and Emergency Preparedness. And as you noted, the storm impacts and the changing nature of these storms continues to bring significant damage when they come through. The derecho event that happened in October, straight line winds that came across from west to east that really significantly impacted the system. And we continue to see a rise in those type of events, even highlighted by our Christmas Day storm that impacted the state, where we had 110,000 customers for a wind event that blew through the entire state. So we continue to, manage these events as they arise, but often there's an extreme pop-up nature of these wind events as the atmosphere continues to change and temperatures continue to rise.
Thank you. Just a couple comments. Reliability is this commission's preeminent responsibility, and something that we take enormously seriously. Maybe it is, again, a number one priority. Customers and this commission are increasingly intolerant of outages, including storm-related outages. This commission is currently engaged in active litigation regarding storm outages, dealing particularly with the ESAAS event with a variety of utilities. And we will continue to hold utilities accountable for performance, including the assessment of significant, I mean very significant, financial penalties for poor performance. Something that began under Chairman Rhodes and now will continue under my watch and others will be a increased, enhanced emphasis on reliability at all levels, whether it's equipment failure or storm restoration. It is something that, particularly as we went through this pandemic year, we understand that reliability has been paramount to customers' safety and will be enormously important as we rebuild our economy going forward. Again, we let utilities across the state know that this commission takes their duty for a safe and reliable system to the utmost, and we will hold them accountable at every level for poor performance. With that, I turn it over to Commissioner Berman.
Thank you so much. I find these presentations to be very helpful, especially as we look at them for further responsible planning and appropriate refinement as necessary. It's also important, especially as we focus on the major causes of interruptions that may occur from the past year, to have timely information on the status of any pending matters that we may be looking at, including the ERPs and scorecards, et cetera. And I look forward to reviewing those specific issues that will come before us. I can't underscore enough the issue of system resiliency and how important it is, especially as we review NERC's concerns and as we enter the summer season and look at load shifting concerns. We should be very focused on this, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Commissioner Berman. Commissioner Edwards, I apologize.
No, I want to thank you for the comprehensive report. I have no questions, no comments.
Well, thank you. With that, I turn it to Secretary Phillips. Are there any further items to come before us today?
There are no further items to come before you today.
Well, thank you. With that, I will adjourn the session, and thank you very much, and thank you very much for staff for your excellent reports. Thank you.